Israel lost. This may be a bitter pill for Israel, Zionists, and all of its supporters across this world to swallow. But even more bitter for the Palestinians who paid for this victory with their lives, with their dignity, their homes. We often speak about wars in terms of winners and losers, in terms of the conqueror and the conquered, the vanquished. History, after all, is written by the victors. But in categorizing this conflict, the bloodiest of the 21st century, it's easy for both sides to claim a victory. Zionists feel that with this current ceasefire, where all hostages have been returned, where Israel is still very much present in Gaza and perhaps will determine the Strip's future, that it is a victory for them. That over the past 2 years, having wrought havoc, having brought literal hell down upon the Palestinians, they have emerged victorious. Having killed hundreds of thousands of people, having leveled Gaza, having literally sent it back to the Stone Ages, that they are victorious. That perhaps is a surface reading of this victory, a surface reading of the conclusion, if this ceasefire holds, of this victory. But the other side, those supporting Palestine, can they claim this to be a victory? I say yes. It's easy, of course, for my answer to be one of bias, one of leaning towards this narrative. But let us go back, not to October 7th, but to October 6th, or 5th, or 4th, or any other day prior to when history started on October 7th. Gaza was, though, a thriving society with schools and hospitals and infrastructure and almost 2 million inhabitants living under the boot heel of Israel. Despite this claim that they pulled out almost 20 years ago, Gaza was still a community behind a fence, was still a community in bondage, walled in, controlled, monitored, and every so often bloodied. The West Bank was still under occupation. It was still subject to settler violence, to expanding settlements. The population of Israel itself, the Palestinian population of Israel, was still subject to laws that treated them like second-class citizens. But the rub here was that all of this was aided and abetted and accepted by the West. After almost 70 years, 75 years, it had become accepted. It was the norm. It appeared that a Palestinian state would never exist, of course, and that this status quo, the occupied and the occupier, would continue indefinitely. And all of Israel's supporters, all those countries that have aided it militarily, financially, diplomatically, were happy to continue this way. In fact, under Trump, they were pushing for even greater acceptance through the Abraham Accords, where countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, even Qatar, were going to accept the status quo. We're going to accept Israel's occupation of Palestine. October 7th changed all of that. The means by which a people resist occupation is perhaps not for any of us to comment on, for we, thankfully, have been born free. The chains of serfdom, the boot heel of the oppressor is not on our necks. We are not bound in any way. We all live and breathe free air. We do not live in this unending nightmare that at any point our homes, our land, our lives can be taken from us. So who are we to question how the oppressed react to not a day or a week or a decade, but decades of oppression, to having their land stolen from them? Who are we to ask this question? This is, of course, something that in the days and months and even first year after October 7th, everyone was quick to ask, first of all, do you condemn Hamas? And then, of course, preaching this narrative of, the perfect victim, that yes, what is being done with you is unjust. Yes, you deserve the same right to determination and freedom that everyone else does, but do it quietly. Do it without making any noise, without any bloodshed. Do it without disturbing the Israelis. Do it in such a manner that maybe in a century or two we'll consider your plight. So let us move on from October 7th. But let us, if it is to be believed that the attack, this act of resistance, as Norman Finkelstein, it was slaves sort of breaking through their confines, breaking from their confines, breaking from their enslavement. But if it is to be believed that in the conception of the Al-Aqsa flood mission, it was done so to revive the Palestinian cause, to bring notice to it, then at least in this, it achieved what it wanted. For the past 2 years, the global community has had to reckon with its silence, has had to reckon with its acceptance of Israel, and it has forced people to make a very, very clear decision. Either you are with Israel or you're with Palestine. There is no middle ground here, because a middle ground cannot exist. A middle ground cannot exist when one party feels that God or a religious scripture or some sort of historical claim is enough for them to be dominant over another people. If you believe that, then again you are of a certain stripe. You are perhaps a person who is okay with the oppression of another people. You are okay with the racial grounds upon which this oppression is done. And perhaps you in your home countries do the same. You look upon your neighbors who may be of a different religion, maybe of a different skin color, and look upon them with that same jaundiced eye that Israelis look upon Palestinians. You question why they are in your country to begin with. You call for their expulsion. So if a stated, or maybe even unstated, objective of Al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa flood, was to again bring attention to the Palestinian cause, was in some way to thwart the Abraham Accords, then paid for by the blood of the Palestinians, that at least has been achieved. This is not to say that the Abraham Accords are now indefinitely on hold, but at least for the past 2 years, if one thing has dominated humanity on a whole, it is, of course, the question of Palestine. This is not to say that prior to October 7th, people had forgotten Palestine, that its cause was not being advocated, argued. But it is clear that at least that ruckus, that sort of like, that body that had sort of like, was speaking for Palestine was a minority. This wasn't something that countries were bringing up regularly at, for example, the UNGA, or this was like, sort of the headline of the day. It was something, and much like many of these causes, it was by the public on a whole ignored, or even tolerated or ignored. People did not care much for it because, again, there were more pressing things. Russia, Ukraine, the economy, COVID, AI, so many things. But for the past 2 years, we have been fixed upon this one subject, and rightfully so. No people should be born into oppression. No people should be born without even the possibility of freedom, as the Palestinians have. And we see now that if a victory were to be achieved, it would start to look like this. That if the Palestinian cause if the Palestinians were to have a homeland, the conversation at least started on October 7th. That at least was the foundation stone. It was the foundation stone because, again, it was not the lives of the Israelis that was lost on that day. Innocent. But it was at least the argument, that cause, that plight that was brought back into the world's attention. Something that the world had willfully ignored. They say it is an Israeli victory. And if you pick up the New York Times or any other such rag, you will see it being sort of repeated again and again and again. You will see many saying that, yes, this is a victory for Israel. But in the days after October 7th, where, again, the claims of the Israeli government was that we will A, recover the hostages by any means, and B, we will we will completely eradicate Hamas. If those were two stated goals or objectives of Israel's genocide, well, they failed. They failed miserably. Who, and I would love for someone to counter this argument, someone would say otherwise. But the hostages, the very last, who still remain in Gaza, buried thanks to Israel's bombardment, they were not recovered through violence. They were not repatriated thanks to the billions of dollars and the most advanced technology and all the support in the world that Israel had. No, it was done through negotiation. Something that could have ended this conflict within the first month. But of course, that wasn't the route that Israel wanted to go. It wanted to use this particular incident, that of October 7th, to ethnically cleanse Gaza, to remove or expel the people, of course, murdering them beforehand, to get rid of as many as possible, level the ground, almost a clean slate, so that then they could move in. Of course, when that could not be achieved, Israel then went on to expand its war. And in that, at least, I will feel that it did make headway, particularly against Hezbollah in Lebanon. There, at least, I will give it to Israel that in cutting the head of the snake, as they say, Hassan Nasrallah and most of Hezbollah's leadership, and throwing it into disarray, even to the point of having the civilian government calling for its disarmament, there at least Israel did make headway. Of course, it was unable to, as much as it did when during the 2006 Israel and Hezbollah war. It was unable to gain a foothold into Lebanon itself, but maybe that was not one of its objectives. But in defanging Hezbollah, it was able to most definitely do that. Regarding the Houthis, despite being completely unrestricted in what it did, the Houthis over the past 2 years have shown that even though impoverished, even though being completely at odds with the rest of the world, they were able to stand tall in disrupting shipping, in attacking Israel. Whatever it could do, it tried its best. So if any one hero were to emerge from this entire thing, it is the Houthis. And hats off to them. At least someone stood by the Palestinians. Iran, though the claims are being made that sort of Iran is in disarray, that there is, all is not well, leadership issues, and sort of it is ready to topple. Don't buy into the pro-Shah propaganda that many of these Israeli toadies, and Barry Weiss, that's a word that maybe you might want to read up on, that these Israeli toadies that you find among the Iranian diaspora want you to believe. Even though America got involved and sort of much by Israeli design, who's to know how much of an effect it had on Iran's nuclear program? Iran is still there. It stands. In the brief war that it had with Israel, despite being at a technological disadvantage, despite being undermanned and under-resourced in compared to Israel, it was still able to give Israel a bloody nose. Of course, we will never know the full extent of the damage it did, but in seeing missiles rain down upon Tel Aviv, that is something that no other country has been able to do. So I think that sort of all three fights that Israel picked outside of its borders, the only one that appears to have achieved some measure of success is that with Lebanon. Now, of course, we go on to Hamas itself, that second goal of getting rid of these human animals. On the one hand, you have one of the most advanced militaries in the world. On the other, you have a scrappy, homegrown militia going head to head, toe to toe. And with all of its might, with all of its supposed moral superiority and righteousness, with the support of the entire world, it was unable to effectively neuter Hamas. Yes, and this is always in these articles in writing of Israel's victory, that they were able to kill Sinwar and Haniyeh, and yet fighters on the ground fought to the very last day. Explain that to me. Maybe perhaps, again, this was by design too, maybe Netanyahu wanted to keep them around. Or maybe, just maybe, to prolong the war. Or maybe Israel was unable to effectively address a guerrilla army, an army that relied upon homemade IEDs and rocket launchers, harvested from a lot of the, bombs that Israel dropped, and some were duds. And it was sort of, and Hamas put them to good use. A return to sender operations, which if for those of you who ever watch the Electronic Intifada, you will see that they fought until the very last day. Is that evidence of wiping Hamas out? During the first ceasefire, when you had Hamas and its special forces emerge seemingly unscathed, with the captives, it didn't seem like they had just been through a war in which they had lost almost 30,000 fighters, according to Israel. During the second ceasefire, when they again emerged with the captives, again it did not seem as if Hamas's authority, Hamas's strength, Hamas's numbers had dwindled. They call for, as has been repeated by Trump, Hamas's disarmament, and numerous threats are being issued. And yet it is Trump who has allowed them, at least temporarily, to take care of all of these collaborators and gangs that Israel fostered. So Hamas remains. So again, in coming back to those two goals of getting back the hostages through violence, not achieved, and in wiping out or eradicating Hamas, also not achieved. So wither the victory. But then, is this a victory for the Palestinians? For the past 2 years, we have been witness to barbarism on levels not seen since World War II. We, as is now so oft repeated, have been witness to a genocide in 4K, live streamed to us. We have seen every possible excess exceeded. Every red line has been crossed. How, after all of this, can Israel maintain even a shred of its image? Not to say that it had one, but how can it go around and tell people that we are the only democracy in the Middle East? I just don't see Israel and its reputation, its raison d'etre, its entire thesis upon which it is built, how it holds any water now after the past 2 years. And it's not just me who has maybe come to this conclusion. All over the world, in the United States, in the UK, in Germany, in countries that are staunchly by Israel, the public no longer buys it. The public will no longer accept this argument that Israel's right to exist is perhaps paramount to that of the Palestinians' right. The tide has turned. And that is the Palestinian victory. We may never see a Palestinian homeland in our lifetime. We may never see accountability for Israel's genocide. But for all those who lie dead in the graveyard that has become Gaza, they must know now that a greater portion of humanity, more so than on October 6, 2023, now stand with them. And it is this support that will one day achieve that homeland for them.
The revolution will be live.